So Ridley Scott followed up Prometheus with the Alien prequel that we thought we were gonna get in Prometheus, and I guess it's okay. Alien Covenant. Now, Alien Covenant is a very interesting type of alien movie because it kind of bridges the gap between Prometheus and the original Ridley Scott Alien. And like I said in my intro, I feel like this is the movie that people were expecting to get from Prometheus that they really didn't get and felt very disappointed by. And I can definitely say I'm also one of those people. I just didn't get that much out of Prometheus. I thought it was a little too cerebral, a little too abstract with the whole xenomorph thing or lack thereof. There really wasn't much xenomorph action to be seen. And Alien Covenant does bridge the gap between those two movies, and I think it does it in a pretty decent way. It's not perfect. There are things that I kind of have questions about, concerns about, problems with, and we'll get to those. But first off, I gotta say I did like this movie more than I didn't like it. I can honestly say that given the Alien franchise, there really are no horrible installments. Even the worst of them I can find some enjoyment in, and there are decent things about them. So I gotta say this franchise is actually doing a lot better. Sure, it's no longer the peak that it was when Alien and Aliens came out, and those movies are still the gold standard for what an alien movie can be. But after watching Alien Covenant again, I actually found myself enjoying it most of the time. I thought it was pretty cool. We got a decent crew of people on the Covenant. It's this colonist ship with all these people on it trying to colonize a different planet. And you got Dr. Manhattan himself, Billy Crudup, as kind of the leader of this movie. And I thought there was a very interesting twist very early on in this movie where he's not supposed to be the leader, but the leader died in one of the pods that went awry. There was a fire inside the pod and they just couldn't save him. And so immediately this guy kind of has your sympathy because he's not really ready to step up and be that leader. The crew doesn't really know if they can trust him in this new role. He's very unsure of himself. And it gets even more complicated when they find out that they all got woken up right by this other planet that's not the planet they were supposed to go colonize, but seems like a perfectly good candidate for colonization. And on top of that, there's this message coming through that's Country Roads by John Denver, which seems like a pretty random song choice for Elizabeth Shaw, who we saw last in Prometheus, to be sending out into the universe for potentially other people to hear it and then rescue her. And that all seems like a good reason for the crew of the Covenant to go down on this planet and start investigating. What they find are some interesting things, and we have ourselves an alien movie because, you know, as soon as they go down there, they're going to find something that they probably shouldn't have found, and then all hell breaks loose and everybody dies, or at least most of the people will die, and that's exactly what happens in this movie. Is it formulaic at this point? A little bit. It would be very hard for it not to be a little formulaic at this point in the franchise, but for what it does it pretty effectively. When the alien stuff starts happening, it's appropriately exciting. There are some memorable deaths, memorable fight scenes with these creatures, but I'm already getting ahead of myself because we have to kind of fill in the gaps with what happened at the end of Prometheus. At the end of Prometheus, you see Dr. Shaw and David escape, or at least David's head escape, because he kind of died at the end of the last movie. And in this movie, the roles are reversed. David's still alive, but Dr. Shaw has sadly passed away. Which might be a little disingenuous for me to say, because she didn't exactly pass away as much as she was sacrificed or murdered for the sake of science and evolving this xenomorph into kind of what we recognize as the Alien 1 xenomorph. But before all that happened, she did manage to repair David, and we see David in this movie, played once again by Michael Fassbender, and he's once again a highlight in this movie. Michael Fassbender actually has a dual role in this movie. He plays both David and Walter. Walter is the American accented version of David. He's an android, so he's got a couple updates that the original David didn't have. It actually kind of restricts him. David was much more of a free spirit. It was this kind of open AI experiment that Mr. Wayland was really interested in, and now that they're more for mass production, they're going on these missions, their range of intelligence has been more streamlined, and you have some really interesting scenes between David and Walter and what AI could or should be given the state of things. The rest of the cast is fine. You do relate to them in the moment, and honestly, aside from Tennessee, just on account of his cowboy hat, the rest of them are kind of forgettable. I could not tell you any of their names, any of the actors that played them right off the top of my head. And I probably should have written it down. But I feel like the fact that I don't remember it, again, except for Tennessee's cowboy hat, that should tell you how important these people are for the narrative. They're not nearly as important as the two androids are bouncing off of each other, because that's really where the core of this movie is and the core of the intrigue is. Because we find out that David, through some experimentation, has turned what I assume was the Deacon at the end of the last movie into a more evolved state of the xenomorph that we know from the original Alien. And you see different stages and you see different experiments, different designs that look like they were ripped right from H.R. Geiger's portfolio. So there's a lot of very strange designs in there for sure. But the movie also doesn't really explain how the alien eggs that we see there got there. There's no mention of the alien queen. There's no mention of whatever it was we were seeing in the deleted scene of the original Alien where Dallas starts turning into an egg. None of that's really addressed or brought up. Maybe Ridley Scott wanted to be a little vague given how James Cameron changed the alien mythos by inventing the alien queen. So maybe he either didn't want to address that piece of the canon or he wanted to keep it more mysterious. Either way, I feel like that should have been explained a little bit better, at least how it got to the point with the eggs and the face hugger, because I feel like the way the Prometheus movie set things up and how this is more or less a continuation of the Prometheus lore, the egg and face hugger part of the alien life cycle seemed kind of superfluous, kind of unnecessary, because towards the beginning of this movie when they go down onto the planet and they start messing around with these little balls that release these spores, these airborne gas particles that a couple guys inhale, and then they become impregnated with these neomorphs, these kind of proto-xenomorphs. They're very pale and they're smaller. They crawl around on all fours, so they're more animal or cat-like than human-like, and I do like that design. I think those are really cool, really creepy creatures that they came up with. But it does kind of bypass the whole face hugger, incubation period, all that stuff that was crucial in the Alien franchise previously, and with Prometheus and then this movie kind of finding creative ways, I'll give you, for kind of skipping over that part of the life cycle and going straight to the creature bursting out of you. I kind of have to beg the question, why evolutionarily does the xenomorph need the face hugger and the egg portion where it already had a pretty effective way of infecting people, and the process of that reproduction goes by a lot faster than the very slow and methodical process of the egg to face hugger to chest burster to full-blown xenomorph. So that part still for me doesn't make a lot of sense and does kind of keep these movies from being great A-tier alien fare. But that's not to say this movie doesn't try to, because again, when those neomorphs pop out, they pop out in some of the most inventive ways that I've ever seen in an alien movie. The first one we see pops out of a dude's back. It just kind of claws its way out. It's very brutal, very body horror-esque. And then the second one goes through the path of least resistance, which is just straight out of a dude's mouth, kind of just forces his way up his throat, out the mouth, and well, there he is in the world. And both of those scenes are truly horrifying. They both have that body horror element that harkens back to the original Alien, but they're still bringing something new to the table that we haven't seen before, and I do appreciate that. But it's really not until the third act when we actually get a proper xenomorph on screen. The poster and all the promotional material had all of us believing that this was going to be a xenomorph show from beginning to end, but really that's just the last third. A lot of this movie is dealing with the neomorphs, and while those are very creepy, very effective critters to deal with, they bring a more mobile, almost velociraptor type style of attack to this franchise that I thought was pretty cool, but it's still not really the xenomorph action we were kind of promised. But eventually we do get it. David ends up luring, I think it was Billy Crudup's character, into this back room of where all of his research was happening, all of his different experiments. You finally see what actually happened to Dr. Shaw, the kind of post-mortem autopsy that he did on her. And one little detail that I did appreciate is there's a pretty famous design from the work of H.R. Giger of this woman with kind of a biomechanical helmet headdress thing. It's kind of a unique piece. It never really worked its way into the Alien franchise. But if you look at the face of the deceased Dr. Shaw and all the experimentation that went on with her, around her head, I don't know if it's part of her flesh that was morphed and mutated or if it's like a helmet or a piece of technology that was grafted on. It does resemble some of his work, and just as a fan in general, I do appreciate that they finally found a way to work in that very specific design into this Alien franchise. So I thought that was kind of cool. But after he sees all that, he goes and he finds the egg, right? The egg that we recognize, and it opens up. Of course, he has to do the dumb thing and look inside just in time for it to jump out, latch onto his face, and impregnate him. And of course, some time goes by, and then the chest burster comes out, and now we finally have some xenomorph action, and it's really cool. They gotta get off this planet. They're on this escape ship, this like shuttle thing. The thing is scurrying around the outside of the ship, trying to get inside, and so they're trying to fight it, finding different ways to not let it, you know, bleed through the hull. And the way they deal with this thing is actually pretty original. They have this big crane, they scoop it up, and then they just crunch it, and you just see the acid blood splatter. But because it's all contained within that crane's jaws, it only really bleeds through the metal on the crane. It doesn't actually affect the ship. So that was a pretty cool climax. It was pretty exciting, pretty effective, but in true Alien fashion, once they think they're all safe, the few survivors that are left, they're on the ship and they're home free, they're off the planet. Of course, there's just one more xenomorph they have to deal with. And I, for the life of me, have no idea where this xenomorph came from. It might have been a more evolved or more mature version of the neomorph that was on the ship earlier in the movie that they never really dealt with. It kind of escaped and we didn't really see it again. Maybe that evolved into the xenomorph that we see at the end of this movie that they end up blowing out an airlock, which I did kind of have to roll my eyes at, because after a pretty original way to kill the alien with that claw thing, I was thinking, okay, maybe we're beyond the era of blowing it out the airlock like we've seen in nearly every other Alien movie. No, we still have to do the whole trap it, contain it, and then blasting out an airlock so that it can just die in space. Yeah, that kind of let me down, because there really wasn't anything there that I hadn't already seen before in a previous Alien movie, and I still don't really know where that alien came from. If you know where that second xenomorph came from, please let me know in the comments, because I keep running it back in my head and I can't figure it out. I think the only explanation is it's the neomorph that grew up and became a xenomorph, which I also can't rectify. How did it just turn into a xenomorph? That didn't really make sense. Although, like I said earlier, if I do go down that road, there's a lot of the alien life cycle as explained in this movie that doesn't make a whole lot of sense logically. But if I just kind of let that stuff go, sit back and enjoy the movie for what it is, it's perfectly entertaining. I think I actually do enjoy this one more than Prometheus. I think this actually brings a lot more of the alien action that you would want from something that's kind of an alien prequel. But I will say it is kind of hard to watch this without watching Prometheus, so you kind of have to watch both of them back to back. And I don't know if that's worth it with the amount of time it takes to get through both of these movies for a lot of the stuff that still doesn't really add up, and the fact that these movies kind of raise more questions than they answer. I don't know if Ridley Scott was particularly effective at expanding the alien lore and giving us this other side of the xenomorph and xenomorph biology, because I don't think it really added up to much. I think if you look at the first 4 Alien movies before Prometheus went and kind of backfilled a lot of the lore, the stuff that we understood about the xenomorph kind of holds up on its own. The stuff you need to know, you understand, and the stuff that's kind of extra, you can let comics and graphic novels and other media fill in some of those gaps. I don't think we really needed this 2-part epic to do that, because it made everything a lot more convoluted, harder to follow, and for really not that much payoff. Even though at the end of the day, it did still entertain me. I think Michael Fassbender probably deserved an Oscar for his performance as David across these 2 movies. His performance as Walter, maybe if he had a bit more believable American accent, we'd be talking about an Oscar, but at least for David, there's so much depth to that character. There's so much going on behind the eyes. You just don't know if you can trust him. In fact, you definitely know by the end of this movie that you can't trust him and that he's bad news. But as you're watching these movies unfold, there's that intrigue of, okay, I know he knows more than he lets on, but specifically how much more, and what's his end game? There's a lot of mystery there, and I really appreciated Fassbender bringing that depth, but also bringing a surprising charm and likability to that character. I thought that was really cool. And those are pretty much all my thoughts on Alien Covenant. The broad strokes of this movie are pretty straightforward, formulaic, stuff you've seen before in other Alien movies. You know, people going on a mission, get sidetracked, go to this planet that they probably shouldn't go to, unleash some alien thing that they probably shouldn't have, and, you know, now we gotta deal with the consequences. And it does exactly that, and does it effectively. Now, do I think stuff like the spores and David's experimentation and the kind of inexplicable manifestation of these eggs complicate things more than they needed to? Yeah, probably. You could have probably kept maybe one of those things and really developed them. And for me personally, I think the stuff with David's experimentation is the most interesting thing that you should keep. I think the other stuff you kind of do away with, because the original H.R. Giger design for the alien had a biomechanical approach to it. It looked like machinery mixed with biological materials. So by having an android be the one to actually develop this thing into what we know it to be, it does make sense. And maybe he used his cybernetic know-how to really design this thing kind of in his own image. That would have been really cool if they had taken the time to expand on that and explain it and really dive into the meaning behind it and how that all works. Because I feel like David's motivation is there and the pieces are there. It's just that when you've got a few other things going on, and that's not even counting the stuff with the engineers and a lot of the lore that was crucial to understanding that first Prometheus movie, it's just a little too much, a little too all over the place. They really needed to narrow their focus and drill down one concept for where this thing came from. But now I turn over to you guys. What do you think about Alien Covenant? Was it the Alien prequel that you wanted in Prometheus that we didn't get? Or do you think it was still kind of disappointing even with more of the xenomorph stuff? Whatever you think, let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content, and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. And as always, I'm Colby. This is my nerdy talk, and I'll see you in the next video.